Tuesday, Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. Happy to be back for another day. Hope everyone's having a great day out there today. Tremendous show coming up. We're kind of into week 2 of all of the playoffs happening here, and it's only intensifying, right? Wild versus Vegas, Game 5 tonight in Las Vegas. Huge game. Obviously, series tied 2-2 after Vegas got that overtime win at XL Energy Center on Saturday. Couple days of rest for both teams, but now back at it. Sarah McLellan joins me here in just a little bit to break down the game, break down the series so far. Couple of lineup changes anticipated for both teams. Tactical changes, things like that. We'll get into that here in just a minute. Lynx thoughts at the end of the show. They're getting ready for practices, starting practices this season with a lot of memories still of the way last season ended. Twins, all of a sudden, one of the hottest teams in baseball. Who would have thought that a week ago? They clobbered Cleveland last night. 13-16 overall. Still doesn't sound great, but it does sound a lot better than 7-15. We'll get into their win in a moment here. First, though, what I miss. Gonna start Wolves again today because that is on my mind, on my brain. The only thing I can really think about right now is Game 5 in Los Angeles tomorrow night and where this series is. Wolves up 3-1. 3 points to make about it right off the jump. First point to make. This thing is not over, and I'm going to be very curious to see what the mindset is of the Wolves players, how they come out in Wednesday's game. I think that we've seen that this is a team that has taken up a more serious approach, that has cut down at least on the mental mistakes, on the lapses that they can have, things like that. But we have seen this team get hot and cold. We have seen this team go from, I think they've figured it out, to what are they doing real fast. Can they sustain this? Can they finish this off? Can they do it in 5? Why not, right? Don't take the chance of coming back to Minnesota. You've only got one home game guaranteed to you left in this series. Why even use it? Go ahead and finish this off. Use your momentum. Use what you've got going and finish this off on Wednesday night. Doesn't mean they're going to, but I want to see how they approach this game. Do they approach this game with the same urgency and hunger that they have approached these two recent wins that have come down to the wire? Because I think that's the next step for them. And obviously, LeBron at age 40, not going away right now. Not just going to say, you know what, good try, too bad. He is desperate for another championship, another try at this, all of those things. He's got Luka, like 2 great closers. The fact that these 2 games have gone their way is a great sign for the Wolves, but does not guarantee them a single thing going forward. This is still a series. This is still a battle. If you needed any more reminders of that, need I remind you, the Cleveland Cavaliers with LeBron several years back overcame a 3-1 series deficit to beat Golden State. More on Golden State in a moment. 3-1 is not an insurmountable series lead, especially when you have 2 of the greatest players, maybe the greatest player of all time, on your roster. You also have to take into consideration that these last 2 games have been extremely close, and Game 4 could have gone a different direction, and in fact, multiple different times, right? The Wolves were down double digits in the fourth quarter, came back to get into position to win, and then did win that game. Lakers were down 1, 30 seconds left. Luka Doncic bringing the ball up court, gets his feet tangled up with Jaden McDaniels. Looked to me like a good no call at the very least, and the Lakers did have a chance to inbound the ball after that, but that led to a turnover. NBA, though, in their 2-minute report said a foul should have been called on Jaden McDaniels in that moment. If a foul had been called, which again, iffy, suspect to me, but let's just say they called that foul, Lakers would have had 2 free throws, down 1, Luka at the line, pretty good chance he makes 2 and gives them the lead with 30 seconds left. So that's how tenuous this is. Let's say they don't overturn the foul on, let's say they don't overturn the foul from LeBron on Ant. Would have been probably Lakers ball with 14 seconds left, down 1. Like all these things that could have been different in that game that went the Wolves' way, the two big ones at the end. Like that was the margin in Game 4. That margin can disappear. It can go against the Wolves at any moment. So they have to be locking this down Wednesday night to make sure they get this thing done. Final point, they cannot be looking ahead to anything, but we can. And they are on a collision course right now. Again, 3-1 doesn't mean the series is over in either of these cases, but obviously it is an advantage. They're up 3-1 in their series with the Lakers. The Warriors took a 3-1 series lead against the Rockets last night, held on 109-106. Fred VanVleet had a chance to tie it at the end, but his three-pointer was short. So the Rockets, the second seed in the West, down now 3-1 in that series. So if you're looking to the big picture, Wolves and Warriors on a collision course if each can win one more game in the Western Conference semifinals. That brings about a whole host of amazing subplots. I was already thinking about Wolves versus Jimmy Butler, who's now on the Warriors. Old friend, old nemesis Jimmy Butler. That would be an intense playoff series, even if I don't think there's anybody on the Wolves that's still around that was there for the Jimmy years, but still there's some subplots there. You've got Ant against Steph, kind of another potential passing of the torch series if the Wolves get past LeBron and the Lakers. I wasn't even thinking about this, but a colleague of mine this morning, Jeff Day, sent me a message saying we are one game away. We are so close from Draymond versus Rudy. If you remember that from a couple of years ago, that subplot too, where Draymond put Rudy in a headlock, got suspended. Those two guys, no love lost. So amazing subplots potentially there if both of those teams can win one more game in the series. Again, Golden State's got to do the same thing that the Wolves have done. They are both underdogs right now, pulling off the possibility of winning these series. Golden State the 7 seed, Wolves the 6 seed. So actually the Wolves would have home court advantage in that series, which would be interesting. But getting ahead of ourselves, but still looking out there at the tantalizing prospect, Wolves versus Warriors would be the matchup if they can both get past this round. Like I mentioned at the jump, the Twins, all of the sudden, all of the hard hit balls that were hit at somebody in the first couple weeks of the season are now finding holes. I think that's the simplest way to describe what is happening with the offense. A team that just routed Cleveland last night, 11 runs. A couple of them went over the fence. Obviously, you're not going to bring those back, Jeffers and Julian. But a lot of hard-hit balls, either on the ground, line drives, falling in now instead of right at somebody. And that was some of the luck they were talking about early in the season, right? They were thinking, okay, you know what? We're not going all that well. We could look at it and see, yeah, this team doesn't look very good offensively right now. But they were saying, wait. As far as like hard hit rate, things like that, they were more like league average. So they were like, we might not have the greatest offense right now, especially as they sit here with Wallner out, Royce Lewis out, Willie Castro still out, a lot of injuries. Then you bring up Luke Keeschel, he looks like the real deal. He gets hurt right away. They're playing a bunch of journeymen, Mickey Gasper, Jonah Bride, Cody Clemens. They're all getting hits in this game, and all of a sudden it's still clicking, it's still working. Some of that's just because they're taking good at-bats and the balls are finding holes now instead of being right at somebody. So, I don't know. I don't know what to make of this. I do think there has been somewhat of an evening out of things right now. Like Royce said, I still don't think this is a good team, but they are certainly playing better. And again, they've been doing a lot of this without some of their best hitters. If they can hold serve, hold court. Bailey Ober was great last night. We know the strength of this team is starting pitching, and they've been getting some really good starting pitching lately. If they can lean into that and get enough offense now as they're playing some of these better teams, Cleveland, Boston, the Giants coming up in the schedule, if they can do that, then we'll start to say, okay, you know what? Maybe it was more bad start than bad team. Maybe this is a team that will be in the mix at least towards the end. I don't know. We'll see. It feels a lot better than it did a week ago. That much we know for sure. Let's talk wild hockey right now. Sarah McLellan in Vegas. Sarah ready for Game 5 on Tuesday night. Sarah, before we started recording, I asked you, do you think you're going to be making another flight to Vegas for Game 7? Hard to say at this point, but this does have the feel of a series, man. This has been back and forth at this point. It does have the feel of one that could go the distance. I'm sure the Wild would love to get this one, obviously, Tuesday and finish it off at home, but these teams have been pretty evenly matched, even if it's in a different kind of way, even if they get there through different means.
Totally. This has been a very even series. And maybe that wasn't the expectation going in because Vegas, obviously, second best team in the conference, coming in with, a lot of the core that the team had in place when Vegas won the Stanley Cup only 2 years ago. And obviously the Wild getting in on a last-minute goal in the regular season. They had just gotten their lineup back to full strength. So it might have looked a little bit more lopsided. But I think actually, when you look now, this is the Wild pretty much how they were at the beginning of the season when they were healthier. These two teams have a lot more in common than you probably think, just in the way that they want to play. And I think that's why we've seen some very close competitive games. It hasn't been one team completely dominating necessarily in terms of, periods or stretches at a time. I think they've kind of traded off. The Wild's victory in Game 2 is, on paper, Game 2 and 3, the most lopsided, but, there's some empty net goals at play too. And I think you saw then Game 4, just probably where the series is now headed, potentially just in how back and forth and tight it was. The Wild leading going into the third period, they had been undefeated in that situation prior, 29-0 in the regular season. Then obviously that's how they won Games 2 and 3. But I think Vegas's desperation really showed, and their stars finally had an impact on the series, including, Ivan Barbashev getting the game winner in overtime. So I'm curious to see now if it's more of the same, if that was maybe the spark that the Golden Knights needed, that their star players needed, to be more of a factor in the series. But also, how does the Wild reset? Because they were still very much in that game. They had the power play in overtime. That could have been a game that they won, and then obviously take a very commanding 3-1 series lead and have the chance to eliminate the Golden Knights in Game 5. So, probably who recalibrates better, maybe in Game 5 obviously sets the stage then for Game 6, but it'll be interesting to see, especially since it looks like both teams might make some adjustments moving forward in the series.
I want to talk about those adjustments in a minute. First, I want to get like a little bit more big picture, some of the stuff you were talking about just now. It's like the Wild, I think, if you would have told them they'd be 2-2 after 4, I think that's a decent spot for them to be in, especially they lost all 3 games to Vegas during the regular season. Like they lost Game 1. I was not supremely confident. I didn't know that they had this level to them. They've looked like a different team. They've looked like a team that can be, relatively dangerous in the playoffs. A team that kind of like the one that we saw at the start of the year. So you've got that on one side of it, right? But then on the other side of it, you've got it was right there to go up 3-1. If you just are able to close out the third period that you've always been able to close out, again, stakes are higher. It's a 1-goal lead, like all the things, Vegas erased that lead. They actually need to come back just to force overtime. How do you kind of think mentally they kind of balance the disappointment of not being able to go up 3-1 with still? It seemed like they weren't treating it like the sky was falling, at least not John Hines. It kind of felt like he still likes their game, still likes where they're at. So I'm kind of wondering how that plays into their heads in Game 5.
Right. I think you're right. I think they sounded obviously very confident, and that this is different than the past teams that have faltered, and been unable to take that 3-1 lead and then just never won again in the series and were eliminated in 6 by St. Louis and Dallas in the last 2 playoff runs. Right. The team is a little bit is a little different, and they have that experience. But I think 2-2, like I said, maybe it looks. Should it really be 2-2? Vegas was this big juggernaut and the Wild, kind of limped into the playoffs. But I think what we're seeing, to your point of how different they look, I think we're seeing the Wild from the beginning of the season, the team that was, close to or at full strength, that was a top 5 team. And I think that's why these games have been very close why they were right there in game 4. And that's a team that is a handful, for the Golden Knights, because like I said, I think there's a lot of similarities when those two teams are rolling, especially with the Wild. They've defended pretty well. They've obviously been able to get opportunistic scoring. There was so much shot going into the series. How would the Wild handle Vegas's top line? How would they handle Vegas's depth? How would they handle their size and all that muscle they had on the back end? And really, when you break it down, those are 3 of the assets that the Wild have to be 2-2 in this series. They have the better top line. They have the better depth right now. Marcus Foligno has 3 goals. The fourth line has scored, in each of the last 2 games. And they're out hitting the Vegas Golden Knights. They're blocking more shots than them. That, big, intimidating blue line hasn't really been a factor because of the Wild's forecheck. So, they look now more even than maybe we would have thought, because one team, was a division leader. Yeah. Someone else snuck in as a wild card team late in the season. But really, we are seeing the Wild kind of get back to their foundation, their style that, made them a top 5 team early in the season. So I think the confidence is rooted in that this is a team that, when they're playing the way they're supposed to and they have, their people available, they can skate with, a team like Vegas and actually neutralize some of their strengths and take advantage. So I think, there is a case to be made for why this year could be different, and they don't just falter after this, and this is the beginning of the end. Right. Obviously, they still have to go on the ice and prove it beginning in game 5. But you're right. I think it was still very much a team that was like 2-2. Like, this is a battle. This is competitive. This is what you expect for the playoffs. It's hard out there. It's kind of going back to their mantra this season, choose your heart. It's hard to win. It's hard to lose. So which is it going to be? And I think that's why, 2-2, it's competitive. And I don't think if you look at it from that angle, like, this is the Wild who maybe they were supposed to be before the injuries really stopped them. Why wouldn't they be, neck and neck with Vegas?
You talked about maybe some tactical lineup changes. We'll start with the Wild. Could be John Merrill for the 19-year-old rookie Zeev Buium. He's, he certainly had his moments. He looked very skilled, especially on the power play. He's been exposed a little bit defensively. I think they especially when you get the last line change here in Vegas going back there. Now, if this is in fact the move, is this indicative of a tighter game overall that the Wild expects to play, or is this just a one-for-one swap where they just need to shore up that last defensive pairing?
Combination of what we've seen to this point in terms of, it's getting tighter. Now it's a best of 3, but also, like, you look at the way game 4 played out. Obviously, Buium had the high stick, the double minor on Mark Stone. He did play after that. Obviously the Wild, we were able to kill off most of that penalty, but the Golden Knights scored in the final minute. Buium had a few shifts after that, but then in overtime, they didn't play him. So they shortened their bench. And I think then you see the effect that has on the rest of the blue line, because obviously the Brock Favors and Jonas Brodins and Jake Middletons and Jared Spurgeons, they take on a lot more minutes. And it was a failed clear that ultimately led to the game-winning goal. So I think being mindful of that, knowing that if they get into that situation again, can they keep rolling their lines, and kind of keep the minutes more evenly spaced out? So maybe fatigue in a mistake like that isn't a factor in the final outcome. But yeah, too, just tightening up. You're right. They're going back to Vegas. I think Vegas so far has probably leaned into the matchup game a little bit more than the Wild. I think the Wild were okay just rolling their lines. And you can see why, as I mentioned, the fourth line having a positive impact in this series. Obviously, there's been shifts where they've been caught out there, but I think that's happened, kind of across the ledger too. It hasn't just been exclusively them that have necessarily struggled to get out of their own zone, but just knowing now the stakes are higher, being mindful of veteran presence. And two, we've seen a few goals, but, the power play hasn't had as much of an opportunity to really change this series. There haven't been a lot of calls, whether that's right or wrong. It just hasn't been as much of a prominent factor for the Wild. So, I think then they have other options. We saw like Jared Spurgeon, man the point on the power play. But you're right. I think it is just indicative of where they're at in the series. It's 2-2. The next game, obviously, someone's going to be on the brink of elimination after game 5. Being able to shore up and maybe just spread those minutes out a little bit more, especially if they get into another overtime situation. I think it's a change that would be mindful of that if it's one that they follow through on. They said they were considering it. So if it's something that happens, I think that's what is probably, indicative of at this point of the series.
Yeah. Like they're anticipating more of a 3-2 kind of game, not a 5-4 kind of game, which would make sense at this stretch of the season, try to limit Vegas's chances, get on the counterattack, things like that. Vegas maybe going to counter that a little bit by splitting up their best players, which they did some in game 4 to some effect, and they could do again in game 5 to kind of give them a little bit more of a dynamic presence up and down their lineup instead of like throwing all those guys on the first line.
Correct. We saw them split up Jack Eichel, Ivan Barbashev, and Mark Stone in game 4, and that's the way they practiced on Monday. And, for Vegas, is just kind of splitting them up, and we'll see if that works. Obviously, they were, a dynamic trio together, but it kind of plays into that depth balance factor, and that's an area that the Wild have outplayed them in right now, getting production from their third and fourth lines. If they kind of spread the wealth that way, maybe it works, maybe it clicks for them. They obviously, got more dangerous as that game went on in game 4 in the third period to make that rally and get their looks in overtime. But it's a matchup that hasn't been working for them. Clearly in game 4, that was everyone's first points. Mark Stone, Jack Eichel, and Ivan Barbashev, and he got the game winner, obviously in overtime for his second, but still for Stone and Eichel to have not scored in this series.
Yeah.
I think that's alarming for Vegas because that was supposed to be, a big part of their appeal, of how they would contend, of how they would make a long playoff run. Eichel being such a two-way force and how productive he was in the regular season. Obviously, I think this is very much indicative of what the Wild are doing and not just, the Eriksson Ek line. And this is not just, a head-to-head, them neutralizing them. I think it's been from their net out, being aware of when, he's on the ice, taking away his time and space, in the neutral zone so they can't even get into the zone with speed and really canvas their options. So obviously, that's a key for the Wild. If they can continue to keep those players quiet in the series, it obviously bodes well for them. But if they're all three on different lines, it obviously makes the challenge a little bit more difficult because if they're rolling one right after the other, how do they get the Brodin Faber, matchup out there constantly? We'll see. We've seen them kind of double ship those two before in the series, but again, it gets into the chess match. And I think that's kind of suited the Wild, that they haven't had to hard match Vegas so far in the series to have success, but kind of getting down now to the nitty gritty game 5. We'll see if that becomes more of a prominent priority for them.
As the Wolves have shown, it's good to have depth. I don't think Vegas will play the same guys for 24 minutes straight like the Lakers did the other day, but we'll see what they wind up with. Obviously, we've got Game 6 coming back here at the X later in the week. Don't know who's going to be up going into that game, but the Wild will either be, fighting for their lives, trying to force a Game 7, or have the opportunity to clinch on their home ice. I was not at either of these, either Game 3 or 4. I've been to plenty of Wild playoff games in the past. I've heard big crowds, Western Conference Finals way back in the day against Anaheim, when they're trying to make their rally against Dallas, like several years ago, and they're frantically trying to rally against Dallas, like overtime goals, stuff like that. Like they've had some big crowds, but I imagine, like, what was your impression of what you saw Thursday and Saturday? Because a lot of people are saying that was about as good as it can be in that building.
Loud, very loud, and the fans were very in tune with what was going on the ice. And it wasn't just, the goals and the near chances. I mean, it was the subtle plays. It was, the pinching off someone on the boards, a Marcus Foligno hit, and obviously aware of when they thought there should have been a call and there wasn't.
Yeah, right.
Very much the standard that was set kind of in Game 1 in Las Vegas following the series back to Minnesota, that for the most part, these players have been able to play. But yeah, just, they very much had their finger on the pulse of this game, and it was loud. And, I remember Philip Gustafson saying like he couldn't hear anything except the screaming, to the point where the usual communication he would have with the defensemen, on the ice on that shift, like they couldn't, talk as they normally would and communicate like that. So I think that's a factor for them too, especially the starts of these games. It's, more often than not been kind of pivotal for the team that scores first to kind of take control of the game, or at least have a better chance at winning. And I think them being able to capitalize, on the start, and, the energy and enthusiasm from the fans has been key. So, Vegas is a similar atmosphere, obviously a little bit of a different vibe, being on the Strip and just what goes along with the Golden Knights and that whole experience. But I don't think the Wild should feel intimidated to come here. They've obviously already proved they can win here. They won game 2 here, and they kind of quieted the place and really made that a non-factor in terms of that home ice advantage. So they need to win one here if they're going to win the series, either game 5 or game 7, depending obviously what happens in game 6. So I don't think that they should feel, discouraged or that they can't do it, since they did it just last week.
Final thought then, if the Wild are going to get it done, change the narrative, like you said, it's been these game 4s, they couldn't get over the hump, and then it bleeds over into 5 and 6 these last 2 times they've been in the playoffs at least. If they are going to get it done this time, what are the biggest factors in your mind?
I think just getting back to, and sticking with, which they've done a good job at, just the style that suits them. They really are built from their net out. So they need to get the saves that they're supposed to get, which they've gotten in this series from Philip Gustafson. A real no-nonsense defending. They don't have to make the home run play from their blue line. They just have to be smart. And that's in the right position to support each other and make quick outs. Get the puck out of the zone quickly. And then that leads to the opportunistic offense, whether that's, catching Vegas on a rush play, odd man advantage, drawing a power play, taking advantage that way, but clearly also getting in on their forecheck and just going to work along the boards. They've shown they have the size and strength and muscle to win puck battles and challenge Vegas's big defense. And so I think when they do that's their recipe for success. And it's been that way all season. We've just seen it, maybe showcase itself in different ways based on who's in the lineup. But I think they just have to stick to what got them here. And it's that style of play. And the pressure is going to intensify. The stakes are higher. And, Vegas is obviously going to be motivated and have the home ice advantage behind them. But I think just that simple style, sticking to that stinginess, and just not getting overwhelmed by the moment will be key for them to really having a quality chance to not only win game 5, but potentially win the series too.
I got to say that style feels a lot more fun when Kaprizov is back. Yeah, they were just, I think part of what was happening at the X was, so much of the latter half of the season, they were just like trying to grind out points, and those games were not necessarily fun or always interesting. They were just like, let's get a point, get it to overtime. They're playing a much more entertaining style than they had any chance to play before all these guys came back.
Yeah, that margin for error. I mean, they got used to it down the stretch, and it probably helps them in terms of the pressure, right? What to play. But now they're getting that second, third, fourth goal that they weren't getting earlier. And I think there's that confidence too. And you're right. I mean, he's arguably, one of the most dynamic players in the playoffs right now. He's obviously one of the top scorers. Something happens typically when he's on the ice, and you see it just in his work ethic too. And it's a back check. It's him coming back through the neutral zone. It's, battling for space and time, and him looking up and circling the zone. And you're right. It's electrifying to watch for the fans, but also for the team too. I think that's just a total confidence boost. And you're right. It just kind of makes the way that they're supposed to play, just adds a little more pizzazz. And that's why they can be opportunistic and take advantage of their chances and not break out a structure to go hunting for it and trying to reach for something, because when they get the puck down there, they have the skill and talent, especially with him and Boldy, to be able to capitalize. So stay true to that structure, because it'll serve them in the long run without trying to just, get out of character and make a hope play or a risky play. They don't need to do that, because they have the skill to execute when they get down there.
Absolutely. We'll see how this turns out on Tuesday night. Should be tons of fun. This whole series has been great. This playoffs have been fun. Wolves and Wild going back and forth, alternating nights a lot of times. It's just been a lot of entertainment. Monday we got to catch our breath a little bit, but now we get going again. Sarah McLellan, appreciate it as always. We'll catch up again down the road.
Sounds good.
Great stuff from Sarah. As always, follow her work tonight. Star Tribune live blog, updates from Vegas, post-game as well. Should be tons of fun from Vegas. Another late one, if I am not mistaken. 8:30 is the scheduled start time. Not too bad, but let's be honest, it's probably going to be more like 8:50 puck drop. You're going to be up past 11, 11:15, 11:30. If you're wanting to watch that whole thing. Same with the Wolves tomorrow night, 9 o'clock start. Good luck getting that one tipped off on time. Good luck getting to bed anytime before midnight on that one. And again, from that Wolves game, we'll do a post-game podcast as well. Might have to ramp those up for the Wild, too, if they advance in this round. Could be busier for me as well. But, hey, it's fun this time of year. These teams look different. They look different than they have in past playoff series. Now the question is, can they finish the job when they haven't been able to in a lot of the past cases, including, like Sarah and I talked about, the Wild being good at taking a 2-1 series lead and then falling flat. Can they reverse that trend tonight against Vegas? Let's finish quickly with the cooler. Read with interest, the Lynx starting practice right now, still very much thinking about how last season ended. That controversial and heartbreaking finish, Game 5 of the WNBA Finals. Foul called. Brianna Stewart gets to go to the line, makes 2 free throws to send that game against the Liberty into overtime, and they win in overtime. What more can you say about that? It didn't feel like a fair outcome. I will be curious to see how they channel that this season. That can linger in a bad way. It can also serve as a good motivator. Can they channel it in a good way? I would think that they can. They seem like the right kind of team with the right kind of mindset to channel that into an opportunity instead of a constant chip on your shoulder where you're always kind of thinking everybody's out to get you. That's what you don't want to see this season. You want to see them playing with an edge, but you want to see them playing confidently and not always thinking that they're about to get something go against them. So that's the story of the Lynx season, I think, going forward. Can they channel that energy into a good way and get right back where they were on the brink of another championship? That will do it for me today. Chip Scoggins will be on tomorrow. We'll be talking a bunch of stuff. Wolves for sure. Maybe some Vikings draft left over. All that good stuff. Lavelle Neal III, I think, later this week. So plenty of good stuff. Wolves, Wild, playoffs galore. Until then, I'm Michael Rand. Have a great rest of your Tuesday. Back at it again tomorrow.